And hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Two Back Set podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the college football playoff. The 4 teams have been selected. One team got left out rather notably. And we're going to talk about that, talk about the matchups a little bit before the 2 actual semis that'll be played, because, of course, Fusion's Longhorns are in. Before that, that's Patrick, a.k.a. Mr. Fusion.
Greetings and salutations, football fans. A hell of a weekend of championship football.
Well, for most
Definitely.
of you. Not for me, because I'm Thomas, a.k.a. Mr. Warburg, and I'm a Hawkeye fan. I didn't expect it would be close, and it was actually closer than I hoped.
Yeah.
The rest certainly didn't help make it great, but we were going to lose regardless. Want to get that out of the way.
Yeah.
But missing the Deacon Hill, him getting thrown to the ground like a sack of potatoes, that would get somebody suspended in the NFL. Missing that completely changed the game because that would have been 3-3. Most likely with a made field goal, because that's right before the fumble happened, I think, on the 30. So that would have changed the game. And then, of course, the fumble wasn't a fumble. Was it recovered? Was it not recovered?
Right.
Not the first time Iowa's had review go completely wrongly against them. Like the whole spirit of review being broken by making a decision and reversing it in review. But still, we were going to lose no matter what. Couldn't move the ball to save our lives. And it's thankfully the last meaningful game Brian Ferentz will ever coach at the University of Iowa. But that was championship weekend. That's in the books. This morning, we saw our final 4 teams for the college football playoff for the final 4-team year. And predictably, they decided 13-0 doesn't matter.
Right.
So, Fusion, first off and foremost, we'll start with the positive. Your Texas Longhorns are in at the number 3 seed.
Yes.
And by virtue of Michigan selecting the Rose Bowl, you're going to be playing in New Orleans.
Yep, the Sugar
which
Bowl,
is
which is great.
Far shorter travel.
Yep.
And you have stated on this show that you do plan to go to the title game. Would they win and get to the title game? Would you plan to go to the semi?
No, it just, logistically speaking, from Houston to New Orleans is about a 6-hour drive. For me, from Austin, you're talking about almost 9+ hours. And yeah, as much as I dig New Orleans, let me correct myself, New Orleans, as much as I dig the Big Easy, man, I would sit this one out. And honestly, when I look at that matchup, it's going to be a hell of a game. But I think that is a very favorable matchup for Texas. I really do. Washington, I really do. Now, there's a lot to overcome because they're facing probably the best quarterback they're going to face all season, Michael Penix Jr.
Yes.
At this point,
I think the best offense they're going to face.
Yeah, and they have 3 really big, high-quality, potentially first-round wide receivers. Their running game, as piecemealed as it was, Johnson almost ran for 1,000 yards this season. The one thing is when I think about this, though, it's in football, it's one in the trenches, and I gotta side with the Longhorns. I think that their front 7 defensively and their offensive line, which is so stacked, really they have the advantage against Washington there. Yeah,
so we'll start with this matchup before we get into the travesty at the end. Just for anyone watching this at the beginning, we're going to get into our gripes with the inconsistencies of the playoff system at the end of the episode. We'll start with the actual matchups to be played.
So calm down, Warburg.
I see it differently. We're going 2-3 for the matchup, but the order went Michigan 1, Washington 2, Texas 3, Alabama 4, and then Florida State at the 5. And I believe it was Georgia 6, right? Yeah, Georgia 6.
Now, can I ask this? Why the hell do they have to pick a 5 and a 6? What's the point of that? What is the point?
It helps the Orange Bowl.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about
the New Year's 6 guys also the ones that run the playoff committee?
I believe are they
because it's the bowl systems in the playoff committee.
Okay, yeah.
There's some tie in there.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it just feels a little kind of like a slap in the face, particularly this season. Like this season in particular, being labeled number 5 is a big slap in the face. It really is. Yeah. So, but yeah, man, Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Alabama, which is we can talk about the controversy at number 4. But
they'll be great games, but you gotta. There will be a conversation to have later in the episode, but we'll focus again on the 2-3 because I think it's the most interesting matchup. Because I think you and I have a different take on this. I see this game being more like in the Iowa State game, in that their quarterback was the difference maker. Iowa State was for their team. Washington's the kind of same thing, but Washington has significantly better weapons.
Sure.
Right? Like a massive upgrade. and
Right.
they can quick game you to death. Washington can do the same thing. That neutralizes your defensive pressure up the middle.
Okay.
And because Penix can get out of the tackle box because he's a
True.
rather mobile quarterback. That is a way
Right.
to very quickly neutralize a up the middle, and I think they have two great edge rushers too, but those
Yep.
defensive tackles are, I mean, they are insane up the middle. So you move the box, go to your short mid game, and then once they start cheating up to cover that, then you go over the top.
Yep.
I think Washington can do that. It'll just be how well does that get defended on the back end by Texas? They
Sure.
haven't had to defend that realistically pretty much all year. Even
Oklahoma's
and then in
probably the
Oklahoma,
closest.
and they
Close
lost that game.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like this is stylistically, I think, maybe the worst case scenario for them because Washington has that in their arsenal.
Okay.
Alabama and, Alabama only really went deep on them after the game was already kind of at hand
Mhm.
in the second half in that game. And then, but Milroe has gotten better, I'll definitely say. And Michigan definitely, I don't think they have that in their arsenal. I don't think they could win a shootout. Washington
No, they can't.
absolutely can.
No, because the last 4 weeks, JJ McCarthy hasn't looked like he did the first few weeks of the season when he played a weaker
Against
schedule.
Iowa, he threw only deep like 2 or 3 times, and they were
Right.
not good throws.
They're not good throws. No.
Like
When he was when they
he
were
was
when
lucky
they
in
were
Iowa.
when they were mashing people to start the season off against lower quality opponents, they were able to take the lid off because they were lower quality opponents on the defensive side. You're talking about Alabama, who is like this was a year going into it that everyone said this isn't Alabama's best defense. They don't have a lot of quality skill players on the offensive side of the football. But Nick Saban, after that Texas loss, found a way to make things be Alabama again. Where I see this game, like that Alabama Michigan game, it could be really ugly for Michigan, in my opinion. And that's why if you saw that video, they grunted when they got that pick. They wanted Florida State because they knew, like, hey, without Jordan Travis, like, hey, we watched them last night. Their defense is very athletic. They're very fast. We got that covered. We can beat Florida State, right? They all groaned collectively in that conference room when they announced that it was Alabama they were facing, and the reason why is because they know that's going to be a big challenge for Michigan. Yeah.
I agree. But for the
Now I will say this. I will say this about real quick about the Washington Texas game. The reason I feel it's I'm not you know what I know Texas is already opening up at 5.5 points. My feeling is the advantage for Texas is that Washington, their defense has been smoke and mirrors. There's been a lot of they have some speedy guys out there, and when they've had challenges, they've created turnovers. But their defense isn't stellar in Washington, where I think that's where Texas has the advantage on the offensive side of the football. If Xavier Worthy plays, it's going to be an incredible game, and that could be a crazy shootout right there.
It's going to be, I think, the most fun to watch of the two semi
Right.
games for sure.
Right.
You have Washington as the higher seed, but they're essentially getting kind of a quasi road game potentially
Right.
in terms of the
Right.
fan base, and they are also matching up a team that's not. I don't want to put them in the same camp as Oregon stylistically, but they're not. It's not Michigan. You're not facing a grounded pound kind of team.
Sure.
It's going to be a fascinating case because I think Texas matches up better with either the 1 or the 4. Whoever wins that game, if Texas were to win, wouldn't shock me if they're the favorite in the national title game.
And it's crazy to think that we could get Alabama, Texas again.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy to think that.
Yeah.
Like when they faced each other in week 2 of the season, we thought that, hey, this is going to create a big hole where one team was going to be, of these two would be left out. And remember, you and I both said, like, hey, whoever
Winners
wins
in,
that
yeah.
game, the winner's in. Look where we're at. And we could talk about this in a little bit because I do have an opinion on this as well. Some of it may agree with you, some of it may not. But yeah, I agree. Like, this is crazy to think that we could face. And if it were to come down to Texas and Michigan, I really like Texas over Michigan. If that were the case in
Iowa
the
destroyed their
game.
offensive line.
Yeah, there were a lot of holes the last 2 weeks that I've seen against Michigan outside of Corum and Edwards that I say, okay, Texas can beat these guys. Like, I'm not saying they can stomp them, but I'm saying, like, I like Texas against Michigan. Talking about Bama, if it were Bama and Texas part 2, that's a tough one because that's a very different Alabama team. That's a very different Jalen Milroe, right? There's so many different things to think about going into if there were a rematch. But hell, man, like, I get it. These could be. I hope for some fun games. I don't want to see a blowout just because that would really annoy me. I really want to watch quality
And you
football
know the
when it
you
comes
know
on.
the committee's like, God, I hope that somebody doesn't get blown out because we let Florida
Right.
State just chilling with maybe
Yeah.
the best defense in the country,
I mean, their defense is what kept them in
and their
that game. I
defense is
mean,
going to
won them
get
that game.
better because they're getting their
Yeah.
defensive tackle back because he's on was it academic suspension or he couldn't play until the new semester. Well, that's
Okay.
up before the playoff.
Yeah. So January 1, he can play. Yep.
Yeah, like, and apparently he's been practicing and absolutely
So
destroying the
he,
first team in
so he,
practice.
so he's
Like,
allowed to practice. So he's allowed to practice, but
yeah,
he just can't play.
yeah.
Okay.
So he's been like destroying them in practice, and is like, yeah, they're gonna get better on defense.
Yeah, they have some speedsters on the defensive line, which was incredible to watch. I
Yeah,
mean, they were fast. And I mean, Louisville just Plummer could not get set that whole game. Now, the first half, he threw some really awful balls to open receivers that were just horrible passes. But the second half, he could not get a rhythm because their defense
yeah.
was
Once
just
they
smothering
settled in,
him.
it was done.
Yeah, but
But
that
before
defense
we
won Florida State that game.
agreed,
Yeah,
but before we get into that, let's talk Alabama, Michigan. That's the other set
sure,
semifinal game.
sure,
I believe currently Alabama's like a 1.5 point underdog, but like essentially it's going to be pick 'em and probably flip the other way come actual kick time
right.
in January. So where do you come down on that? I'm leaning just based on how they played Iowa, and again maybe they were being more conservative because they didn't really have anything to play for beyond them getting massively upset, which never seemed likely. They certainly could not move the ball as consistently in Iowa as you know they wanted to. They only had 213 yards of total offense, 3.3 yards per play. Iowa's defense is very good, but they
Yeah.
never wore them down. And you got to worry against a team like Alabama that has more depth than Iowa. Is Michigan going to be the ones that their defense gets worn down? Because I think that's more likely than the inverse against Alabama.
The hardest part for me here is that you have two solid running backs for Michigan, and Corum and Edwards, that you could just feed them the ball the entire game. Now,
You could if your
Sa-
line holds up.
it was just saying Saban and they lost. Did they lose one of their guards
Zinter.
yesterday?
Well,
Okay,
he was the
Zinter.
center got a little banged up, but he came
Yeah.
back.
Okay.
But yeah, not sure what the injury was.
Yeah, but they're down a guard,
Yeah,
right?
Zinter's done for the year.
Okay, Zinter's
At least
done.
I think he's a
But then
guard. I don't think he's a
yeah.
tackle. I think he's a
So
guard.
that's two of their interior that have been shaken up, right? Um, my feeling is that if Saban is a wizard at this, he knows how to counter your advantages to where you have to plan around those counters, right? And that's what Texas did against Bama. But that was very early in the season. A lot's changed since then. This is a very different Alabama team. I could see them just running in the box and doing what other teams said. Hey, we dare you to throw the ball now, Michigan. Just throw the ball. Let's see what you can do. We don't have like premier elite talent on the defensive side, but these guys they're coached NFL style, which means they know where to give up yardage and not to give up yardage. They know where the secondary knows when to turn and look for the ball. This would be a very tough game for Michigan to win, in my opinion. Yeah.
Now that said, they do if they kind of go full Iowa in terms of TEU Iowa, I
Sure.
think they have mismatches at tight end and over the middle. On the outside, no, I don't think they do. But that style can work against a defense like Alabama because they're going to give you the short stuff.
Yep.
So just kill them with the tight ends, get 10, 15 yards here and there. And then you get into scoring position and see what happens. Now, they
Right.
haven't had to be in the red zone very much, and they weren't very successful last night. They had two very, very short drives, but they had trouble consistently moving a ball against a defense that already plays like that. Iowa's, I think, a better coached defense, at all three levels.
Sure.
They don't have the same talent as Alabama, not saying that. But Phil Parker is, I think, unquestionably the best defensive coach in the country.
Sure.
Alabama's not that far behind, though. If Michigan was already struggling to consistently move the ball against that, Alabama definitely has a better offense than Iowa. And I think they're going to win the game. So I think they're going to pull the 2014 Ohio State. They're going to jump in as the 4 and go to the title game. Win or not, I don't know. But they're my pick to go to the title
And
right
that's
now.
going to anger so many fucking people.
Especially
And if yeah,
if
I
part
know.
2 happens.
Yeah. Well, and can you imagine where, Texas a lot, and you mentioned this last episode. Texas is one of those schools where, a lot of people like to just pick on them because they're the big business school within the state of Texas. They're not as Texasy as like an A&M, right? Unless you go visit the culture, then you realize, okay, I was a little wrong about that. The tea sipping thing, all those type of jokes, right? But I guarantee you, if it were Alabama and Texas in a rematch, Texas is the fucking darling of the nation. Like everybody will be cheering on Texas
Oh,
to
absolutely.
take it to Alabama and Nick Saban. Because if you remember, guys, 2009, that game looked like Texas was going to beat them until Colt McCoy jammed his shoulder and Garrett Gilbert had to go out there, a freshman quarterback, had no very like he had like 10 snaps all season, right? And he had
Hmm.
to lead them. And it was still a pretty close game until the fourth quarter. It just like that Iowa Michigan game last night, that 23 nothing, oh, it was a stomping. No, man, it's just that Iowa couldn't get the ball. They couldn't move the ball. And eventually, like, the rule of things is that it's just gonna put Michigan in a position to score points when you can't move the ball at all. I think we also saw it with Louisville and Florida State. I mean, Florida State was able to get a couple scores in just because, Louisville couldn't do anything, you
Exactly.
know?
And Florida State was on a guy who hadn't probably taken snaps in months with the
Yep.
first team offense. Like,
But Trey Benson is a very good running back. Keon
yeah,
Coleman's an elite wide receiver. So it was like eventually they're going to find moments to push. If your offense can't move the ball, your defense is going to have to play a field position game. Iowa's did that all year, but then Michigan's talent is much
yeah, they're
better than a
just
lot of
it's yeah,
yeah.
that doesn't hold up
So
against better talent
yeah,
across the board. So
yeah.
that's where we're thinking. I'm picking Alabama in the first semi, 1 versus
Okay,
4. Let's pick Texas, Washington, first blush.
okay.
Obviously, you're a Texas guy, so I'm assuming you're thinking Texas will win.
I've got to pick Texas
They are
here. I'm
currently
going
favored, I believe, based on
five
early
five and a
odds.
half. Yeah, 5.5 points. They're favorites.
I
Yeah,
mean, I want to say I favor them, but I favored Oregon and Washington won.
right.
I think Oregon, pound for pound, is probably or was at the time, quote unquote, the better team. But Washington wins. Like DeBoer, they win. It's really hard to pick against them because I mean, what's his record? 103-11 as a coach. That's
Yep.
bonkers good. Like that is an NCAA simulation of a dynasty number, right? Like that shouldn't be possible, and
Right.
it is. So it's hard to pick against that guy because he's a hell of a coach.
Right.
I just think the unit of the side of the ball that's going to be the difference, unless they can scheme around it, is Texas's D line. Now it's possible to mitigate it, but I don't know if you can do that for the entirety of the game.
Here's where I jump in and say the part of this that scares me the most, it's been proven, is that Texas, their safeties don't have deep speed. They can get burned. And if you're going to do your best to, the thing is with Washington, if they can assemble some form of like short game in terms of running the ball, short passes, the safeties have to cheat up
Exactly.
and Washington has the receivers to throw up and over. And I will tell you, like those safeties for Texas, all four of them, the starters and the backups, they don't have speed at safety. They can get burned. Ryan Watts, the cornerback from Ohio State, the transfer from Ohio State, he is great against the run. He's decent against the pass, but there's a reason why they roll between uh, zone coverage and man to man because of where they are on the field because they can get burned deep. There's a reason why, and that's the big hole for me with Texas all season. And I've mentioned this a few times before. It's like they lack speed on the back end, and that's where things can get very dangerous. And Washington is not afraid to throw the ball deep because Penix does have an arm, and that's really it. Where I think the difference is that if you're talking about the short game, Jalen Ford, Anthony Hill, those guys at linebacker are heavy hitters. You're going to have to go out there and hit them hard early. Like Oregon's got talent and they have speed on the defensive side. I just don't think they have the bangers that like a Texas or an Alabama does. So I could see this being where you got to knock these guys around to kind of set them to kill their rhythm. If you can kill their rhythm, you have a chance, and then you turn it over to the offense and let the offense game because offensively, I'm not worried about Texas. You're right. It's the defense for me. It's the back end. Very concerned about that. Yeah,
Fair
very much
enough.
so. Yeah,
So I'm assuming you're leaning Texas. I'm probably gonna also lean Texas,
sure,
but this is one of those games where it's like, man, you tell me the outcome, I'm not gonna be shocked
sure.
because it's like
Um,
Penix hasn't looked good for a month, but it's like he also is he banged up? Is he not okay? Give him 3 weeks off. Maybe he's
yeah,
fine. Maybe he's
right,
back to early season Michael Penix Jr. That'd be awesome to see in the playoff. To see if he looks like the dude who was going to win the Heisman. This is a very different game.
right.
So it really is kind of a crapshoot. But I'm going to on paper right now lean Texas.
I've got to go with Texas, man. I have to. Just these are my boys. They're playing for a chance to go for to win to play for the national title in Texas, in Houston. Like this is it, man. This is it. You're talking about a Saban and his mentor mentee matchup again, but this time for a trophy. Like if that were to happen, and that's assuming Michigan were to lose, because Michigan can. I'm not discounting Michigan because they
Oh, they could
are one
still
of the top
win.
teams. They can still win. They're one of the top teams in the country. But when you're talking about us stacking what we see here, I got to go with Texas, man. I've got to go with my boys. I do. I think that on the defensive side of the football, they have monsters on the line. But for me, on the offensive side is where Texas can really they have offensive monsters on the offensive line. They can establish the run with C.J. Baxter, Keelan Robinson, and Blue. Then I think they can really chip away at Washington, and then you hold them, bend but don't break that defense. I think that it plays into that style of game really plays into Texas. But like you said, I've been picking UW and I've been picking Penix all year because they have moments. They show their moments where, hey, when it's a close game, we're gonna march down the field and kick a game winner or throw a touchdown to win the game. Like that's it. It is it is a little scary for me. It is. I'll be honest with you. I like this game though because it's a fresh matchup, man. It's a very fresh matchup.
Mm-hmm. But how about this? 2 Big 10, 2 SEC, essentially.
Okay, so you've been following. You were in the Discord. You saw the jokes. You probably saw the jokes between my best friend and I about this. But like, look, man. Given what would happen at the Big 12 title game where Yormark was booed out of the stadium and all that shit, I think it would be kind of funny if Chris Del Conte decides to have the Longhorns wear SEC patches on their uniforms. Like, I know the NCAA would get pissed about it, but like, what would be the repercussions of that? Like, it's like we're representing the SEC now, like just to be dicks to the Big 12. But it's interesting, man. I mean, next year will be very fun, with Texas and the Big 12 for sure. Yeah, but man, do you want to talk about number 4, man? You want to talk about this
Yes,
spot? Let's do
because I
this
have
because
a serious issue with
I'm gonna
the.
hand it over to you, man, to
Okay.
let you vent it out.
So, obviously, the big elephant in the room is that Florida State
Yeah,
got left out
right.
as a 13-0 Power 5 champion. The other 2 Power 5 champions sailed in undefeated. Rightfully so, I will also add. My problem is the NCAA, not the NCAA, the committee in the last
Sure.
year of the 4 team deciding, hey, pass precedent, and I get they change people and all that, but you kind of have to treat this like a Supreme Court if we're going to do it this way. Precedent has to matter. If
Sure.
you're going to throw the precedent out in the last year, we all knew Cincy was going to get their shit kicked in. They
Right.
got their shit kicked in. Didn't matter, right? They got in. They deserved it. They earned it. Florida State deserved it and earned it. Alabama didn't because they lost. I don't care how they finished. They needed a miracle against Auburn. An Auburn team that got destroyed by New Mexico State, right? Like this is the team that struggled at USF, right? It's not exactly like these guys have been beating people by 40 for the last month, right? Like let's not act like that happened against. That's what's happening with Alabama. This isn't like we're trying to debate, hey, who's on the 4 or 5 line for the March Madness. This is the chance for the only 4 to throw out precedent and to not have a defined metric, to make it a feel, this is who we feel we don't want to play. They actually believe almost verbatim said that. The commission said, well, yeah, it was really kind of the coaches in the room saying like, hey, who would we not want to play? That turns this into a predictive model for the top 4, which is antithetical to the entire notion of sports. Because if you turn it into an entirely predictive model of better matchups and what will mean better games and more deserving games, or more like, I don't want to say deserving, I'm mixing my words, but you know what I mean. Like the 4 best teams. If it's
Sure.
all predictive, don't play the games. Let's just
Okay.
run up a simulator, build it in NCAA football 25 next year. Don't even play the games. Because you can't turn the final 4 into a predictive model when the rest of it were all based on actual results on the field metrics. That is wrong. And I think is a of all the things going on right now, we got sign stealing. We got Iowa and Iowa State players betting on games. Like
Sure.
that is an assault on the integrity of the sport to do that. And I don't think that's being hyperbolic. You essentially just said, "Hey, you won your games. Doesn't matter though. We just think Alabama's better. We don't know because you didn't play each other. We just think they're better. It's almost like, hey, they don't think upsets can happen. Like, are you shitting me? You're gonna get your QB number 2 back. Rodemaker was out with concussion. They're gonna have extra practices with him at the number 1 because remember, up until the last 3 weeks, he'd been the number 2. So you're gonna have basically a whole month of prep as with him as the 1, and he was a good recruit. With those weapons, that talent, getting their best defender back, you want to tell me they wouldn't have had a chance against Michigan? You fucking crazy. Like, Michigan got pushed around by Iowa. You want to tell me Florida State's defense isn't just as talented? And that Florida State could move the ball, even with their backup quarterback? You tell me that, I don't think you know football. And just because Vegas said they weren't going to be favored, Vegas doesn't decide games. Unless you want to get into conversations about ref calls and covering spreads and all that. That's a different conversation. We can't let predictive future decisions, like what we think will happen, become the basis for decision making in the now. That's shitty. And that's wrong. That's my stance on it.
Okay, that's fair. For me, it was when I broke things down. Well, let me go in a different. Let me take this in a different route. I think the question I have now is kind of a what came first, chicken or the egg? What came first for the committee? Was Texas slotted in at number 3, or did they slot in Alabama into the playoff so that they had to slot in Texas? You know, that's a question I have because I understand your side and I understand everyone's side. And as I listened more and more and more the last 10, 15 hours, I was okay with Florida State getting into the 4 spot only because of the fact that they did go undefeated, right? That was a big thing. Now, if you ask me who are the 4 best teams in college football, I wouldn't have put Florida State in that. And I still don't. Because as much as I think that their defense is spectacular, I think they're a much different team without Jordan Travis. So I understand your side, but my feeling was is that are they going for what they perceive as the 4 best teams? But I think the reality is that we know it's not about that. We
It never
know
has been.
it's at the end of the well, we knew this from 2014, the very first year where you had Baylor and TCU because of the way the Big 12 was structured with A&M and Missouri and Nebraska leaving, there wasn't a title game that year, right? There wasn't a Big 12 title game. And because of that, they were punished even though they had 1 losses and they were higher ranked than Ohio State most of the season, right? They got vaulted by Ohio State. Now, if Ohio State eventually went in and won the national championship that year, whatever. But my point being is like we knew from the very get-go that this was about high profile money making decisions.
And
Big
somehow
Ten,
Booger
SEC.
McFarland had the courage to fucking say that on the show.
Yep, I
That
know.
was awesome.
No, I mean, hey, you know, someone has to say it. At the end of the day, this is a business. They're worried about their bucks. I think for me, also, it's about 70-30. 70% money, 30% optics. Because last year, TCU was that darling team that got in, but they got their shit kicked in the title game, right?
They also
And
won
that's
their
scared.
semi, though.
No, they won their semi, but they went and got destroyed in that title game. And
But
that's
that was a
scared.
case of Georgia being the undisputed number 1 team. Michigan would have got their shit kicked in.
Do you really think they would
They
have won by
were.
it
That
would be
that
60?
team. was
Georgia was going to destroy
insanely
anybody by 60 points.
just
Okay.
that team just had God on their side, dude. Like they could
Mm.
not screw
I
up.
mean, they had. I'll be fair. They had like 3 guys that are first round
Yeah,
picks on
like they were
defense. I mean, yeah,
just
you're. Yeah,
insanely loaded.
yeah. Um, my feeling is that I understand where you're coming from. I understand where Florida State's coming from, but I'm not shocked because for me, the committee didn't have the balls to keep the SEC out.
They
That's
should have.
really what it boiled down. That's really what it boiled down to. Because when I thought about this while I was sleeping last night, I saw you had the conversation in Discord about, hey, this has to be FSU. Here's why. I heard my buddy and I were trading texts back and forth all night. Tried to go to bed, was laying in bed thinking all night, and my feeling was this: Georgia and Alabama were saying, okay, we deserve to be in no matter what. Why is that? Okay, break it down. Georgia, top team all season, loses the final title game to Alabama, who did lose to Texas at home by 2 scores. A team that went out there and destroyed them in Tuscaloosa. And then you look at the fact that, hey, they, like you said, they barely won the Iron Bowl. They struggled against South Florida on the road, but then they also struggled against Arkansas at home. Like these were, oh well, Texas struggled. Texas led those games and they weren't in doubt, but like except for that U of H game. I'm gonna be clear, that U of H game controversial at the end, right? Outside of that, but there are multiple games for Alabama, so that for them to be good enough to go out there and beat Georgia, to me, it answers a big question that I had week 1: is Georgia legit? And they weren't. We knew that. Okay, is Alabama legit? They're good teams. If you
But
ask me,
that right there, Georgia's not legit, which delegitimizes that win and
sure,
takes its power away, which means how do you put them in
yeah,
as
no, no, no.
Alabama? Like, I just don't
I
get it.
get I get what you're saying. For me, would I say is Alabama or Georgia in terms of like overall teams better than Florida State right now? Yes, because of the quarterback, right? That's a big hole for me for Florida State. With that said, I would be if Florida State was in, okay. I will say I was a little selfish before the games started yesterday because I was worried that all this talk was going. It really felt like everybody was preparing to push Texas out. Really, if they won convincingly in the Big 12 title game, they weren't going to get in because Alabama or Georgia needed to be in,
That would have
and
been worse. That would have been way
that would
worse.
that would have been way worse because of that win
Yeah,
against
that because that is the
Alabama.
direct head to head.
Yeah. And every single talking head on all networks yesterday before the game started, they all agreed the best win in college football this season was Texas in Tuscaloosa. Like everyone said that like that was the marquee win this season before the title games. And for me it's like, okay, I'm listening and I hear all these like some of these guys talk about, hey, I feel that Texas needs to be the 3 seed. They should be in, they should be in. But then I hear the what ifs and it's like, but Georgia and Alabama, but Georgia's the back to back, but Georgia, but Alabama. And I'm like, man, and that's why I told you the other day, it would not be fair to say, well, Georgia deserves to be in because they're back to back champs. That's bullshit, man. Like, I don't care. They need to win the SEC title game to get in. They couldn't do it. Okay. Now, by proxy, Alabama's controversially shouldn't be in because hey, Florida State deserves it just a little bit more. Okay, if you're talking about the fact that they don't have a quarterback, that's fine.
2 road SEC wins and run the table in the ACC.
Yeah, I think their loophole is that when you
Oh,
look at
and even
overall
better,
strength,
the key wins. LSU was mysteriously not on Florida State's. Was on Alabama's though. Key win for Alabama. Not for
see,
FSU.
wait. They didn't. ESPN did not list them as a key victory because
Yep.
LSU was what, number 5 when they played them. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
have to consider
They didn't
it
though. It
should be
wasn't on the graphic.
really. I didn't see that on the
That
graphic. I
was
missed that.
that was the worst part for me. Is just this selective? Hey, this matters, but this doesn't. It's absurd. And I keep going back to that Mike Leach rant from back when he was at Washington State about
Sure.
how yeah, the committee we're just going to give all this power to 13 people in a room. There's 5 power conferences and 4 seats at the table, and we're just going to trust they know football. That's stupid. Like, this is really dumb. Like, the NCAA and for March Madness, for all its faults, they have some issues with transparency, sure, but like the net, it's public. Well, I don't know if they full black boxes open, but like we know what the rankings are. We know what the criteria are for it.
Sure. Sure.
Like their commissioner is Like, God, is it Gavin? Fuck. I can't remember the name because I'm locked in on football right now. But
Sure.
like, they're more. Nobody really complains until you're getting into the double-digit seeds because they follow precedent, right? They have their set criteria. Everybody knows, hey, like this team can't play this team because of X factor in the postseason, or they're in the same conference, or whatever. There's listed criteria that they generally stick with beyond like weird, like, oh, well, we didn't plan for that. Sorry, and here's why. Like they do
Right.
tend to explain it. This committee doesn't do that, and it was already a sport that has done it as hey, like just letting the AP pick the national championship or how many years was so dumb. Like it's the only NCAA sport that an undefeated Power 5 team doesn't have a shot at the championship. It's the only one. You're undefeated in your sport as a power program, you don't have a shot. And it even trickles down to Liberty right now. You're undefeated, but you don't get a shot. You have no chance. Sorry, you're screwed just because of the conference you're in. This is dumb. It always has been dumb. And it's not even going to be fixed with the 12 team because I don't think Liberty'd be in. I think they should, but they're not going
They
to.
should. This is what frustrates me is that if we're going to expand to 12, at least make that 12 a 12th seed an at-large bid. Like the ability to have an at-large bid, right?
Because you need to
have
get rid
do
of
that.
this. This is the
Yes.
BCS died to prevent situations like this from happening, and it happened again.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
I mean,
what are we doing?
the last few years of the BCOs was very frustrating because we were having situations and arguments like this, you
Yeah,
know, and like their system was supposed to be a flawless computer system, which it wasn't at the
yeah.
end of the
And
day.
Auburn's over here like, we're title champs too,
Yep.
right? Like, this is designed, or was supposed to be designed to prevent this, and they got damn lucky it hadn't happened until the 10th year.
Well, it was like a few years back. What was that? That Scott Frost undefeated team, right? It
Yeah,
was a
they
US.
got left out.
They got
But
left
again,
out.
they
I
were
mean,
they weren't Power 5, so screw them. I hate that
I
because that's
mean,
the best part
yeah,
about March Madness is the Cinderellas. It's the St. Peter's going to the Elite Eight, right? Like that's not possible in this sport that we all love
right.
is a travesty of actual sports. Like we all say, oh, any given day, but not really. We rig the system, so that's not possible. The
Right.
powers that be rig it so that can't happen. And we all need to collectively be like, hey, Joey Galloway, you bootlicker, you can fucking suck it. We need to change this shit. Like when he was like being really condescending to White Booger was like, hey, this is wrong and goes against everything they've done in the past 9 years. Like that dude was right. Talking about McFarland.
Yeah.
Like the sport as a whole needs to be like, hey, we're going into 12 team. We need more transparency. We need actual defined criteria. You need to establish that precedent matters above all else. Beyond like, did somebody die on the field? Precedent has to absolutely matter more than anything else. Because otherwise we're not playing by the same rules year to year.
Well, yeah, you're right. You're right because the thing about with me with Florida State was I knew they were going. I was leaning towards more than likely they're not going to be picked was because of this vague criteria that they're now speaking up on
Yeah,
players
they've
on the
never done it
roster
before.
because
They changed the
because
rules.
now when they started talking about that, I was like, yeah, this feels like they're setting themselves. Once Jordan Travis went down 3 weeks ago, they were like, we need to put that out there to let because that way people can emotionally prepare themselves. If Florida State goes undefeated, we may not pick them because they don't have a premier quarterback, right, to
Mm-hmm.
lead their offense. So we need to prepare them. And I wasn't startled by it, but I was like, never really heard that the rosters were important in years past. That never,
It
you
didn't for
know,
Cincy.
but
Cincy got in.
yeah, I know, but they were really talking it up the last 4 or 5 weeks. So it's like, okay, it was nothing new, but it's like, okay, so that does go into your criteria. Like you said, we need to have it in paper, like written on paper, what the criteria are
They
to get
do
in, right?
technically, like that is in their thing, but they don't.
Mm,
They pick it. They will like. There's no set. Hey, this before this, before this, before this, before this. There's no order of operations. It's
sure.
very clearly we're gonna wait and prioritize and change on this nebulous notion of well, we just know football more than everybody else.
And it's the committee's discretion. That's their loophole, committee discretion,
That's
and
dumb.
uh, that
You
is
need
very
to do
dumb.
that, and we get away from that kind of with the 12 team because you can have those more nebulous conversations around the 8 to 12 mark.
Sure.
in most years, you shouldn't if it's an only 4. Like, that needs to be, this is the order of operations, and unless an extraordinary event happens, like, again, like a Marshall, like, did half the team die in a plane crash? You know? Like, beyond that,
Yeah.
you stick to the order of operations, and you don't get to pick and choose what's more important than another. Especially when it comes to undefeated versus one-loss teams. Like, that's my problem with it. And always
Sure.
has been since the jump. And here's
Well,
where
you know,
it gets sticky.
go for it.
Like I said, Florida State's going to become a better team if they accept the invite and nobody opts out for the Orange Bowl.
Sure.
What if they win? And what if we don't have an undefeated playoff winner? They're going to claim the title, and they should. And I think they have a way stronger claim than UCF ever did, because they're a Power 5 team with 2 SEC wins, and then 3 if they beat Georgia. Like, that is not out of the realm of possibility, because as you said, Georgia is an extremely good team. They
Right.
are not unbeatable.
Right.
You give them their best defensive player back, prep time with their QB2 to become the QB1 for now. Not out of the realm of possibility they win that game. And then they're 14-0. We could have a 13, 14-1. What would it be?
Texas. Let's just say Texas
Yeah,
win it all.
they win it all. So they were what, 12-1? So it'd be
12-1.
14-1 and a 14-0 FSU sitting right there. That's inexcusable that's even a possibility left on the table by the committee. That's the problem I've got. They
Okay.
backed themselves into this corner of, we could let FSU win their bowl game, and not have a chance at the title. That is just antithetical to the notion of competition.
I
That's
think
my
they were
problem.
what's the okay? So we have the Orange Bowl.
They're like a
What's the
10-point
next?
dog right now.
Okay, so let's just say Florida State was number 4 because I totally forget the lower the New Year's Day bowls.
So Orange Bowl
If
is the 5-6.
5-6, and then what comes after that for SEC?
Shoot. It's
Is
going
it
to
the
be
Peach
whatever
Bowl?
Ole Miss is in. Peach Bowls.
Peach Bowl? I'm gonna say
Right.
Peach Bowl. I think so. Yeah, because that used to be a BCS bowl, and that's a high profile bowl. So I'm gonna say Peach Bowl. So I think that they were terrified of putting Alabama in the Orange Bowl and Georgia in the Peach Bowl. Like I really think they were terrified of that, just because of the PR nightmare they would have in the SEC. They were terrified of that, and they didn't want to have to hear from Nick Saban and Kirby Smart for the next 4 weeks of just mouthing off. And so, which
And Sankey.
yeah. So I think that they didn't have the balls to put in Florida State, and they were like, it's easy for us. Our excuse is the quarterback situation because we have been leaning on it. I really thought that they probably thought, like I thought, that Louisville was going to, and you thought it too, Louisville was going to win yesterday. You know, that we all thought Louisville was going to win.
Didn't
And then when
happen.
they didn't win, when it didn't happen, they're like, well, shit.
Yeah.
Apparently they were up all night trying to figure this out.
And I will never forget the coaches, guys, football guys in the room just decided who we didn't want to play should be the 4. Like, that is so bad as a decision-making criteria. I can't put it into words. It is so bad that's what boils down the decision-making for a team, for a school or a sport that has 130 plus teams. That's the criteria for who gets to be national championship, who gets a shot at it. That's
the good news
bad.
The good news is next year when you're talking about having to argue about the 8 and 12 spots,
it's far less of a problem. It's going to become we're going to complain about last 4 in March Madness level talk.
Oh, you're talking about
far different conversations.
2 to 3 win, 2 to 3 lost teams,
Yeah.
and it's like
that
okay,
absolutely,
right.
I completely understand, but it's worth being mad right now.
Sure, no, it's very much so because it's an undefeated team. They did what they were told to do, which is you run the table, you beat everybody that's in front of you from start to finish, and you're a power conference that you should get in. And I feel for Florida State, and I really do. I feel for those players. I really do. Now, like I said, do I think that as of right now they're one of the top 4 teams in the country? I don't think so, but I'm wrong about a lot of shit. I'll be honest with you, man. But just because I think that Jordan,
we picked Louisville.
Yeah, I think Jordan Travis really changes the makeup of that team as a whole, not just offensively, but the team as a whole. But that doesn't mean how I feel is how the committee should have gone. I don't think that that's right.
Yeah.
I don't.
So, but that brings me to one more question before we get out of here.
Sure.
If you're Florida State, and I don't know if they have since we've been recording, do you accept the Orange Bowl invite after that?
Man, given
The statements that
Norvell's
the conference commissioner
Norvell,
and
yeah,
Norvell's statements, which are scathing,
yes,
I don't know if I accept. I don't know if they do accept that invitation and just stay. Hey, we'll stay 13-0 because bowl games, with draft opt outs and everything, who's to
yeah,
say who actually plays?
sure.
But hey, you ended your season 13-0, and we're gonna plant our flag at 13-0. That is not out of the realm of possibility. And then, even more, I don't know if the ACC sends a representative to the Orange Bowl if FSU declines. If I'm the ACC, you do everything in your power to support FSU because they're the ones that want to break away,
Yeah.
and you just boycott the Orange Bowl.
Well, I think a media person, like a blogger, posted this. Was a very good point. It's going to be a very interesting fall meeting, winter meeting between the ACC and Florida State. Like when the ACC reconvenes this winter to talk about the next season, it's going to be a very uncomfortable room. It will be, and I think that if I were the ACC, if I want to save face with Florida State, I would push them to say, hey, if you want to, you know, decline the invite out of protest, we will not only will we support you, but we will withdraw our conference from that bowl game. I think that would save them because you remember we talked about this when conference shuffling was happening that Florida State was looking to get out of the ACC, but they just couldn't afford the $140 million media buy to get out.
Yeah, if you do
Man, if
that, coupled with the fact that the 12-team playoff eliminates this issue,
yeah,
at least on the top end of it, of the top
sure.
seeds, I think that would really galvanize the ACC if they do that.
Yeah,
I
it
think
will
it might
show the
anyway
yeah,
because
yeah,
the ACC put out that statement immediately.
right.
Like I think that's gonna mend some bridges between FSU and ACC because everyone's mad as hell right now, and that misery loves company part is probably gonna be a good thing. Plus the fact that grant of rights seems pretty solid.
Great.
So that's definitely, but that conversation and the ESPN of it all, come next media buy around time, that's gonna be fascinating.
Yeah. I think you got a good point here, man. That I really think that if I were the ACC, I would tell Florida State, hey, unless your players are adamant about playing in that game, you guys should decline the invite, and we will decline sending another school over there to that bowl game, just so
Well, they
the
can't
optics of
officially tell no other schools to do it.
yeah,
They could void the contract with this for going forward,
yeah,
but
yeah,
for
yeah,
this season, they couldn't stop a team from officially doing it.
yeah. That's
But
true.
like if
That's
you
true.
go to Louisville and be like, hey, do you want to play Georgia? Because I don't think you should.
Yeah,
You give them the whole thing, and maybe Brom wouldn't either because they just got destroyed by FSU. At least in the trenches,
right,
got destroyed.
right.
Like do they just, hey, we'll take the bowl we were going to get anyway because they already probably
Sure.
have an invite.
Yeah.
So like we just won't move up, and then everyone else moves up behind us.
That would make the NCAA and the committee look really bad. It would. And hey, man, just like you said, given Norvell's statement, I wouldn't be shocked if they do that. If Florida State does that, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be shocked.
It'd be definitely the kind of great, hey, we're gonna throw up the birds on the way out the door kind of moment. I'd appreciate it. I'd respect it.
Hell of a way to wrap up this like our conversations this college football season,
Heck
man.
yeah. Speaking of wrapping up the college football season, a quick update on our pick'em pool. Chris, aka Gamma Caruchador, has won our pick'em pool. He picked 47 games, tied with me, and one behind Fusion. Fusion takes the big crown, but since he and I are the showrunners,
Right.
Chris wins the wood burning. We're hoping next year to broaden the pool of players. Winner will also get a wood burning custom from yours truly. Could be your favorite team. I'm gonna look up. Chris is a Ravens fan, so I'm actually gonna look up some logos and maybe do a football like coaster set or something for him. Gotta see what he's feeling. Chris, if you see this, holler at me. We have already started DMing, but I'm thinking something football related since it was a football pick'em. So,
Nice.
I think that's going to do it for today's show for our venting / prediction sections about the college football playoff, the issues around Florida State. Going forward, we will have, possibly emergency stuff like if Iowa hires a new coordinator during the bowl prep. Not out of the realm of possibility, depending on the Brian situation. It depends on what all happens there. Major injury updates, like if it turns out like maybe the x-rays on Worthy's ankle were wrong. Crazy things that happen in the bowl lead up. we might talk about crazy finishes, like if anything nuts happens in a bowl game.
Sure.
You know, like what was that? Was that Tennessee Purdue game a few years ago? That was just
yeah.
absolutely nuts. Not amounts of
Right.
interceptions and turnovers, wild stuff. A TCU game had a similar thing. You know, we might have a New Year's Day one because there's a lot of great New Year's Day bowls. We'll have wrap up conversations about the individual semifinals as well. And if Fusion does go to the title game, we'll have a direct report from one of our two co-hosts about an in-person national title appearance, hopefully by the Texas Longhorns. I think that'd be really cool.
Oh yeah.
Well, we're gonna get out of here. Everybody, drop us a follow, hit the like, subscribe, help that algorithm, and we'll see you sometime later in the bowl season.
Peace.